exciting day today is, and last night, what a great beginning. It's our great privilege to have Dr. Tony Wagner from Harvard here. I am not going to go into his whole resume. He forbid me to do that. But all of you know that we've been reading the Global Achievement Gap. There are still books available that is free to you as a staff member. So if you want a copy of the book, feel free to take one today if you don't have one. His new book, Creating Innovators, which we are an early release site to get access to, is available today as well. If you want him to sign your book, since you're going to be rushing to class, if you want to leave your book with your name in it, we'll make sure you get it if you'd like him to sign your book while he's here with us today. These types of things are not possible without the partnership of our amazing community partners who are so committed to investing in professional learning for our entire community. And so I just wanted to thank them, even though they're not here today, the New Albany Foundation and Education Endowment and the New Albany for Kids. And with that, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tony Wagner.
Thank you. Good morning. Appreciate you getting up so nice and early. Some of you may know I'm a recovering high school English teacher and K-8 principal. Spent about 16 years teaching. So needless to say, one of my favorite audiences to have a conversation with is teachers. So I'm looking forward to this. You know, I've been in education now 40-odd years, and what I see over and over again is reform du jour, fad of the month. I am this month's fad, maybe. The problem is, you know, we're frequently talking about solutions to problems that are not well understood, answers to questions that have not been adequately explored. That's why I love this Einstein quote: the formulation of the problem is often more essential than the solution. What's the problem? Increasing test scores? Getting ready for Common Core? Value-added teacher evaluations? Ugh. What's the problem to be solved? Well, that's what I'd like to offer a perspective on this morning. Number one, in the new global knowledge economy, when my clicker's not working, there, all students need new skills. The skills for a good career, the skills for continuous learning, regardless of whether or not it's college, and the skills for active and informed citizenship have converged. They're the same skills. And they're skills that, for the most part, we neither know how to teach nor test. Problem one. And even beyond that, what we're beginning to understand now, and I'll talk about this morning in terms of my new work, is it isn't just skills. It's the capacity to innovate that is the real added value that businesses and nonprofits seek in every employee. Problem one, all kids, new skills. Problem two, very slow this morning, didn't get enough coffee. Problem two, the next generation, the digital natives, are very differently motivated both to learn and to work. Which, from my point of view, means that we need to reconceptualize the education problem. For 25 years, you have been hammered with schools are failing, who's to blame? Well, educators are to blame, or maybe parents, but somebody is to blame, right? I don't agree. I think the problem, in fact, is that our system of education needs reinventing, not reforming. It's not failing, it's obsolete. We have inherited a factory model system of schooling, an assembly line system model of schooling that is 100 years old. It replaced the one-room schoolhouses, but it too needs to be replaced internally. All right, so, as some of you know, how many of you have had a chance to at least look at the Global Achievement Gap? Raise your hands. Ooh, everybody, that's it. Okay, I'll give the multiple choice test now and we can be done. No, just kidding. So you all are familiar with this idea of the 7 survival skills. This is really being tricky today, right? But let me begin with this premise. Here's the fundamental challenge that we have as educators. The whole idea of education is premised on knowledge scarcity. Who were the high priests in the Middle Ages? Those who had the scrolls and the clay tablets. They had knowledge everybody else didn't have. Then it became the folks who could buy very, very expensive books. And even today, the whole idea of being a teacher, in large measure, is the idea that I have knowledge that my students need, and my job is to impart it to them. But here's a little problem. Today, knowledge is a free commodity like air or water. Today, it's on every internet-connected device. How many planets are there today? Are we up one or down one? Anybody check their news feeds? Oh, and then, by the way, the periodic table, how many of you had to memorize that? Raise your hands. How many elements are there? Did I hear that? I'm sorry, I missed that. But whatever I remember you think you remember is wrong because 2 more were invented last week. True story. So the challenge here then, it's not getting my clicker to work better. The challenge is to realize that the world simply no longer cares what our students know. There is no competitive advantage any longer in knowing more than the person next to you. You think you've memorized the 50 state capitals? Well, I'll Google them. Let's see who's quicker, right? The world today cares about what our students can do with what they know. That's a very different education challenge. Then the question becomes, do they have the skill and do they have the will? Skill and will. That's where we come in. Our job is no longer merely to impart knowledge. Anybody been to the Khan Academy website lately? Raise your hands. 3,000 videos. Try competing with that. We shouldn't have to. How many of you are using the flipped model of teaching? Raise your hands. The idea that you assign a Khan Academy video as homework, and then you spend the class time very different. All right, so briefly then, this is really annoying. Let's stretch out here a little bit. Aha. We'll probably pull out all the plugs, then we'll have to start over. All right. Okay. So we know all this, right? You know what the 7 survival skills are. What I just want to review briefly with you are some of the kind of challenges that I think they represent for us as educators. Critical thinking, problem solving. You understand that increasingly every leading company, profit, non-profit, big business, small business, really expects employees to think continuously about how to improve their product or service. New example, not in the book, learned about just recently. The U.S. Army has always had experts come back from the battlefield to write battlefield manuals about how to conduct warfare, right? They go to the war colleges, they write these tomes. They still have battlefield manuals, but do you know how they're written today? As wikis, with every single soldier expected to contribute new, just-in-time learning. As General Martin Dempsey, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, said to me in a recent interview, the lieutenant sitting in the mountains of Afghanistan is in a better position to know more and make better decisions than the general sitting in Kabul, provided he or she has been taught to think critically. And that's a big provider. General Dempsey has presided over the complete reinvention of the entire education of every soldier and officer in the U.S. military. Because for him, learning that skill is not just a luxury, it's a matter of life and death. Little problem, you know, for us in education, critical thinking is kind of a buzzword. It'd be fun to kind of play with that idea now and ask you what your definition is. You know, sometimes I ask educators, I get an answer like this. Well, critical thinking means thinking critically. It's kind of a circular thing. Why? Because we're not accountable. That's not our job, really. When was the last time you saw a test that demanded a lot of critical thinking? Not a part of our accountability. Whereas out there in the world, they're very clear how important that is and what it means. And what you find over and over again is executives in business, nonprofit, who talk about the ability to ask really good questions, to ask the right questions, as opposed to getting more right answers. And any of you ever do learning walks, remember I call them learning walks, not walkthroughs. Teachers hear walkthroughs and think drive-bys. The whole idea of a learning walk, which we're going to do later this morning, is to really get better at trying to look at and understand instruction with an aim to thinking about how to give useful feedback for improving it. But the whole idea here is that when you do a learning walk, one interesting thing to try is to listen for who's asking what kinds of questions. Even as a teacher, try that sometime. Listen for yourself. Who's asking what kinds of questions in your class? Collaboration across networks and leading by influence. Little problem here. How are we in education, which is arguably the most isolated profession in modern work life? We work alone all day, every day. How are we going to teach collaboration?
How are we going to model that behavior? Rarely, if ever, ourselves experiencing teamwork. I'm going to come back to this challenge at the end. I deeply believe we have to work in new ways. Agility and adaptability, of course, you understand. The nature of the problems, the complexity demands that while your job title may stay the same, your capacity to pick up new problems, work in new ways is constantly changing. Initiative and entrepreneurialism. Here's an interesting one. You remember Mark Chandler, Vice President of Cisco Systems, telling me how executives of large companies like his lay awake at night worrying about how to keep that entrepreneurial spirit alive in their organizations. He said, if I have an employee who sets and meets 5 goals, that's simply no longer good enough. He said, if on the other hand, I have an employee who sets 10 stretch goals and perhaps only succeeds at 7 or 8, he or she is a hero. But think carefully. Missing 2 or 3 out of 10, what would that person be as a student in our classrooms? A C, B student, right? They would have failed 2 or 3. We'll come back to this issue of failure in a moment. Effective oral and written communication, the #1 complaint of both college teachers and employers. Senior executive at Dell said, you know the reason these kids can't write is because they do not know how to think. They don't know how to construct an argument. They don't know how to weigh evidence. They don't know how to analyze. And he said, and I remember these words, being the recovering high school English teacher that I am, he said, that's only half the problem. The other half of the problem, in his words, were they do not know how to write with voice, meaning they don't know how to put their own passion and perspective into their communications so as to be truly persuasive. Think about that in whatever you teach. When was the last time you asked a student to write with voice? Accessing and analyzing information. I've just alluded to that problem. Today, where information is ubiquitous, where it's on every internet-connected device, where in fact your textbooks are likely to be replaced by iPads or their equivalents in the next few years. It suggests a profound change in our understanding of what's truly important in classrooms. Lastly, curiosity and imagination. How many of you know Dan Pink's book, A Whole New Mind? Raise your hands. Many of you, good. It's a very interesting book where he describes how in a sophisticated consumer economy, more and more people want products that have some kind of creativity, some kind of imagination, that are more intuitively easier to use. Think Apple's line of products versus the other guys. Right. So he believes that the so-called right brain skills, creativity, imagination, and empathy, are at least as important as the left brain skills in the 21st century. But I've come to have a very different take on these capacities of curiosity and imagination as a result of my research of the last 3 years, which I'm about to tell you about. All right, so let me bring up to date here. We know this. The global achievement gap is the gap between the new skills all students need for careers, college, and citizenship. Again, they've converged. It's not just preparing people for work. It's preparing people for citizenship, preparing people to be a lifelong learner. They are the same skills. Not true 40 years ago, but it is today. Today, 40 years ago, there was a real contradiction between a good liberal argument for the workplace and obeying authority. No longer true. The problem that I see is that increasingly in many, many schools, we have one curriculum. It's test prep. Now, let me be clear. I believe in accountability. I believe in assessment. The problem is that in our country, we're trying to do it on the cheap with multiple choice, factual recall tests that tell us almost nothing about college, career, or citizenship readiness. I've seen too many schools and districts make AYP and fail their kids. Why? All of your kids graduate, but do they graduate college, career, and citizenship ready, and how do you know? They go on to college. How many actually graduate? How many go on with the skills they need? Do you know? It's a critical question. Sadly, the whole idea of having the wrong metric, measuring the wrong things, we're beginning to discover is actually worse than measuring nothing at all. We're incenting the wrong kinds of teaching. It's not your fault. That's just what it is. Very different from the rest of the world, where increasingly they're using PISA-like tests, Program for International Student Assessment, where 3/4 of the PISA questions are open-ended, constructive response questions. 3/4. Memorization will not get you very far on these international assessments. That's one reason why the United States does so poorly. 15th in reading, 24th in science, 33rd in math in the world. We're not preparing students for the world they're moving to. And we're falling behind other countries that are. 1995, we were still the #1 country in the world in terms of college completion. Today, we're 15th. What do you think that means in terms of the job prospects? Where companies are going to locate for the future? Okay, so that was 2008. That book came out 4 years ago. 2 things happened. One was I got kind of an immediate affirmation from a very wide range of sources that, yep, these are exactly the right skills. Literally, invitations from West Point to Wall Street, to Taiwan, to Singapore, to Finland, and every place in between. Very nice. But then the other problem happened. The other thing happened. The economy melted down. Remember, 4 years ago? And I was forced to kind of really reconsider and reflect. Are these, in fact, enough, these skills? Because what I saw were patterns of college graduates who come from good schools being laid off or being unemployed, having to go back and live with mom or dad. 1/3 of all recent college graduates today, 1/3 of all recent college graduates are living at home, either unemployed or underemployed. Presumably they have some of these skills. What's missing? What's the problem? Well, I tried to become a student of economics to really understand the problem, you know, and I came to see a few things many of you may already know. Number one, our economy is driven by consumer spending. 70% of our GDP. We used to be the country that made more things than any other country. Manufacturing was the main source of wealth in our country. No longer. We buy bunches of stuff other people made. Second, that consumer spending has for 20 years been increasingly fueled by people going into debt. Savings rate in 2007 was -2%. Leading me to worry that, in fact, one of the root causes of our economic crisis, beyond just the banking, beyond just the real estate issues, those are symptoms, is that we've created an economy based on people spending money they do not have to buy things they may not need, threatening the planet in the process. That economy, it's becoming increasingly clear, is not sustainable. Right now, today, 15% of all Americans are either unemployed or underemployed. Real middle-class income has fallen 11% in a decade. Even those who have jobs used to work on the shop floor for $28 an hour, now work sweeping the Walmart floor for $7 an hour. How are we going to solve this problem? Well, as I continued to study, I came across one word over and over again: innovation. The idea is not just the breakthroughs in science and technology and so on, the disruptive innovations that make some people a lot of money, but the whole idea is that we become a country that produces more better ideas to solve more different kinds of problems than is done elsewhere. That what we produce are new ideas in every domain. As Thomas Friedman talks about it in his new book, it's the idea that that spark of imagination is that something extra that we have to cultivate in every young person. So we all know young people are born creative, they're born curious, they're born imaginative, they're born with a capacity to innovate. You know, if you doubt that, listen to the questions a 4-year-old asks at any given moment in time. But the question that I became interested in is, are we innovative as a country in spite of or because of our education system? Or is it because of more of our system of laws or freedom of speech, availability of venture capital? So my Trivia Pursuit question of the day is the following. What do Bill Gates, Edwin Land, the inventor of the Polaroid instant camera, Martin Zuckerberg of Facebook, and Bonnie Raitt, the folk singer, all four have in common? They dropped out of Harvard, thank you very much, not just any college. They were Harvard dropouts, all four. Bonnie was red quick. But the point here is that if you really look at the list of highly successful innovators and entrepreneurs, you might get the impression that college was kind of a superfluous thing, or even something that got in the way. Their education was interfering with their learning. So what I decided to do was, in this new book, I spent the last 3 years researching and writing, is interview highly innovative young people in their 20s. who are innovative in a variety of ways, some in STEM fields, some in the arts, some in social entrepreneurship and innovation. And then try to study their ecosystems to understand what enabled them to become so innovative. I interviewed all of their parents. Then I asked each one of them, was there a teacher or a mentor who made a significant difference in your lives? And they all said yes. And I interviewed that teacher and that mentor. Skip slides here while yeah, okay. So, I came to discover a couple of patterns as I interviewed all of these parents and teachers and mentors. Number one, the teachers whom I interviewed in every single case, and I'm talking elementary through graduate school, in every case, were outliers. They taught in ways that were very different than their peers. Substantially different. And then when I looked at what made them outliers, how did they in fact teach, I found a stunning pattern of similarities. Literally from elementary school to graduate school, in the ways these educators taught, in the culture of their classrooms. They didn't merely teach skills, the ones I described. They did that. But they created a very different culture of learning that was radically at odds with the culture of schooling in their colleagues' classrooms in 5 significant respects. Number one, in most of our classrooms, it's all about individual achievement. Can you get, the highest GPA? Can you rise above the crowds here? Whereas in culture of learning to become an innovator, it is all about collaboration. Most work is done in teams because it turns out innovation is a team sport. There is no innovation working alone. Things are too complex today to be a successful lone wolf innovator. Number 2, we celebrate and reward specialization. You go to the high schools and we've divided and conquered the knowledge universe by subject content area. We go to college, our expectation is that we become a major in something. We specialize. The whole idea of getting tenure is that you become a specialist in something that's this wide, and you know that much about something this wide. The world of innovation is all about studying and understanding problems across disciplinary boundaries. Teaching and learning interdisciplinary. Director of Talent at Google, Judy Gilbert, said to me, if there's one thing educators must understand, is that problems cannot be understood nor solved within the bright lines of academic disciplines. Culture of schooling in America is risk averse. You all are not encouraged to take risks in your teaching. Kids' jobs is to figure out kind of a lot of what the teacher wants, and to certainly not risk the F word, failure. So contrast that for a moment with the world of innovation, which is all about trial and error, all about learning how to take risks and learn from mistakes. I went to IDEO, the most innovative design company in the world. They have a motto. Their motto is fail early and fail often. Why? Because there's no innovation without trial and error. Trial and error is a simple term for R&D. I go to the Stanford Design School, one of the most fascinating interdisciplinary schools in a college in the country. And they're saying, well, we're actually sort of thinking F is the new A. Try selling that to your parents. Or your students. I talked to a student at the Olin College of Engineering, arguably one of the most fascinating and impressive colleges in the country today. All interdisciplinary, all project-based, all team-based. Talked to a student there. He said, well, we don't talk about failure here. We talk about iteration. Version 2.0. As you really think about it, I'll take a quick poll. How many of you believe that as adults, you have learned more from your mistakes than your successes? Raise your hands. Every hand. Look at that. But do we allow our kids to make mistakes? Do we try to structure classrooms in ways that we encourage them to take risks, intellectual risks, make mistakes, and learn from them? Because that, in my view, is where resilience and self-confidence comes from. Picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, yep, I blew that, and moving forward. realizing what you learned from the process. Too much of learning in our classrooms, and I'm afraid I'm kind of replicating it a bit today because of the pressures of time, is a passive experience. It's sit and give. I actually think that's where we learn to be good consumers. It starts in classes, right? Whereas the classrooms of innovators are all about creating real products for real audiences. I was talking to a computer science, I don't know, robotics teacher, I don't know what to call you, because he's having drama kids write scripts for robots. It's amazing. But the thing that struck me in his description of his curriculum just a moment ago is that his students have to produce. They have to produce real products for a real audience, much like what happens on the athletic fields or in the fine or performing arts. You have to show what you know. You have to create. And I think we have to bring that principle back to every class, every day. Lastly, and most importantly perhaps, the world of schooling is about extrinsic incentives, carrots and sticks, grades and GPA, getting into a good school, getting into a good college, and the like. But what I came to discover about these young innovators is that they are far more intrinsically motivated than not. And that in fact, their parents and teachers deliberately and intentionally try to continue to foster and encourage intrinsic motivation. And then when I looked at how they did that, I saw another pattern. It was a pattern of play, passion, and purpose. Parents encouraging more exploratory, discovery-based play, fewer toys, toys without batteries, limiting screen time. Parents who did not fill their kids' days up with lessons, sent them out to play. Teachers who encouraged play in the sense of discovery, in the sense of trial and error. Teachers and parents alike actively encouraging students to find and pursue a passion, even within the context of a content class and a discipline, a time for projects, a time to say, what question is on your mind? What do you want to know about the Civil War? What do you want to become really kind of understand more deeply? And how are you going to teach it to the rest of us? The idea of finding and pursuing a passion, because passions morph, they change. As students become adolescents and young adults, what happens is, in the pursuit of a passion, they begin to work towards a deeper sense of purpose. In every case, these teachers and parents encourage students to think about making a difference, giving back. Every one of these young innovators whom I profile in this book, and whom you'll see in a video in a moment, every one of them wants to, in some way, make a difference and give back. They're passionate, but they're also purposeful. And that's going to extend their passion. All right, so that's that one. Very, very briefly, as we all know, it isn't just all kids new skills, it's kids differently motivated to learn. This is a generation of digital natives that are connecting, creating, collaborating on the internet 24/7. For them, a bad day is a slow internet connection. More and more true for the rest of us as well. So for this generation, their preferred way of learning is through connecting, through following links, through Googling stuff. But the problem is that in our classrooms, there's very little time and opportunity for that. Very little time and opportunity for the learn. So the challenge of technology, in my view, is a double-edged one. I don't think it's a panacea. I think on the one hand, we have to bring the best technologies into the classroom for students to be able to share their work through wikis and Google Docs. Every student should have a digital portfolio, in my opinion, that follows the student from first grade forward. At the same time, they also have to learn how to really do effective internet research, how to detect biases. But at the same time, this is a generation that's spending, according to the Kaiser Foundation, an average of 7 hours and 38 minutes on their electronic devices after school. We're going to have to teach them when not to multitask and how to persevere, how to develop the muscles of discipline and concentration that are required for any kind of serious and sustained work. It's a double-edged challenge we have. So fundamentally, what I'm talking about is moving from a consumer-driven education system, where students passively consume the knowledge that has stood the test of time, timeless learning, to a creation, transformation-driven education system, which is all about, yes, mastering rich and challenging content. It's not skills versus content. But content mastery is no longer the end. It's a means to the end of developing core competencies and doing it in a culture. This is the lesson of this new book. Doing it in a culture that encourages some risk-taking, learning through trial and error, perseverance, and intrinsic motivation. So that's what I mean by reinvention. It's a fundamental shift in how we think of what is the purpose of school, what is the nature of learning. For me, it comes down often to these habits of mind that Deborah Meyer describes. I like this slide because for me it's one way to begin to answer the question of what in fact is critical thinking. Critical thinking isn't just one skill. It's the ability to weigh evidence, to understand perspective, to think about cause and effect, to think about alternative possibilities, what if, and to finally to assess value, individual and social. But most of all, these are habits of question asking. And one of the things I like to listen for, as I mentioned earlier, in classrooms, is who's asking what kinds of questions. So let me end with 3 slides that suggest what I think is the scope of work for us. You all are a wonderful district. You already know you're extraordinarily successful. Here's the challenge, though. Your kids come in smart and privileged. They leave smart and privileged. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what's the value we're adding? You're already a good district. You don't have to worry so much about AYP. You're in an extraordinary position to really rethink and reimagine what is excellence in the 21st century. But to do that, you're going to have to work in different ways and do new kinds of work. That's what I'd like to briefly summarize here. First and foremost, we're going to have to hold ourselves accountable for the skills that matter most. New forms of accountability. AYP doesn't work for you as an accountability measure. You can do that kind of in your sleep, because your kids are already so educated and privileged. It's all about class, isn't it? Very different in Columbus. So the question is, what are you going to hold yourselves accountable for? I personally like this college and work readiness assessment. It's an online test of analytic reasoning, critical thinking, problem solving, and writing. Those of you who have the paperback version of the Global Achievement Gap can go back and learn about a school district in Virginia, already making AYP, wanted to hold itself to a higher standard, started using this test. Turns out half of their seniors, the top half of their seniors who take this test, are in the lowest quartile of college freshmen taking the same test. That's a different standard. That's a different kind of accountability. They're now developing similar assessments for 4th grade and 7th grade, so they can have an aligned and coherent system for measuring the skills that matter most. Secondly, I think we have to always be attending to motivation. Personally, I like the idea of interviewing recent graduates, asking them in what ways they were most and least well prepared, their advice for teachers, their advice for parents, videotaping those focus groups, and bringing them back and discussing. You can do that with your students who are graduates of your elementary and your middle. Asking your graduates about ways in which they were most and least well prepared. Using the high school, and I think there's a middle school version as well, the survey of student engagement. Try to get a sense of how are your students engaged. Remember, all kids new skills, kids differently motivated. Rigor and engagement. Those are our 2 challenges. We have to solve both sides of that equation. We have to do the new work, and to me, that means beginning with, say, the 3 C's. Critical and creative thinking, communication, collaboration. I believe those skills can and must be taught every day in every class. But we need time as teachers to create the new curricula, to create the new assessments. So I believe that districts like yours, I talked with your board about this last night, need to fund R&D. You need time to work collaboratively, to develop this new curricula, to develop interdisciplinary courses. You have a senior seminar, but I think you should have an entire capstone project in senior year, not just a seminar, but where students have to show what they know. They have to do a project they present to other people in depth, and do the same thing in 8th grade, the same thing in 5th grade. So the whole idea is a more performance-based system of teaching, learning, and assessment. Again, I mentioned the idea that all students should have digital portfolios where we show evidence of progressive mastery in their portfolios. We see evidence of progressive mastery of those skills: critical and creative thinking, collaboration, communication. And we spend time as adults deciding what is the level of proficiency we should be expecting 12th grade, 8th grade, 5th grade. We look at student work and we say, is this proficient? Why or why not? Finally, we're going to have to do the new work in new ways. I mentioned earlier, teaching is one of the most isolated professions in modern work life. Even psychologists get together weekly and present case studies. We don't do that. We're going to have to break down the walls of isolation, break down the walls of darkness to succeed as a profession. The analogy I'd like to use, I mentioned for a moment you want to get better at guitar or tennis. You know, only in this imaginary world, there are no place you can go for lessons. There's no tennis clinics, no guitar teachers. You can't see tennis played well on TV. You can't hear the guitar played well. All you can do in this imaginary world to get better is attend a couple of lectures a year on the theory of guitar, the theory of tennis, and then go sit in a room, all alone, all by yourself, practicing all day, every day for 20 years. How good could you get? That is the education profession in my experience. I never, in 16 years of teaching, received a single word of feedback that was helpful to me as an educator, to grow, to change, to challenge, be challenged. We have to learn how to give and receive feedback. We're going to have to learn to work together in new ways. Towards that end, I've asked April if, working with some of your leadership teams this morning, we can visit some classes together, not to in any way evaluate individual teaching. That is not the purpose at all, but it's rather to learn how to look at and talk about instruction. Because administrators' jobs is to get better at observing instruction and giving useful feedback. It's the only way we can grow. Ultimately, every single one of us has to get better at that skill. We have to overcome that sense of isolation. Every team needs to be on a team. Teacher needs to be on a team for collaborative inquiry. We need to be regularly looking at student work and looking also at teacher work. Yes, it's hard when you see the first videotape of yourself. I've been there, done that. You look 10 years older and 10 pounds heavier, right? And, you know, it happens to me all the time because I ask for videos. Every time I'm videoed, I ask for the copy and I look at it. But I learn so much from seeing the videos of my own lessons. And I urge you to do the same. I think districts ought to begin working towards the goal of regularly videotaping lessons, not for evaluation. Let me be really, really clear. I am not talking about a gotcha system. I'm talking about lesson study. I'm talking about continuous improvement. Evaluation systems are mostly broken, and they're not helping us improve, the rest of us. It gets rid of the 1/2 of 1% who doesn't belong in the profession. The only way we improve consistently is through what the Japanese call lesson study. Looking at our own and one another's crafts and learning how to give and receive thoughtful feedback. Same for supervisors, by the way. This is not just a fix the teacher program. I want to have, you know, I challenge administrators here to videotape their faculty meetings, because that's their classroom, right? And see how can we improve adult learning in our schools. If we want to see critical thinking and effective communication and collaboration in the classrooms, it has to start in the faculty rooms. It has to start in the faculty meetings. It has to start with adult leadership for adult learning. So I believe that administrators have to model these behaviors. In time, I deeply believe we're going to have to answer the challenge that's being put forward today in many states. And the whole idea that you can measure a teacher's value by a test score. It's crazy. It's lunacy. But we are going to have to come up with a better system as professionals, because accountability is not going away. So what I think we need to be moving towards and advocating is the idea of digital portfolios for us as teachers, where we have a body of work, samples of lesson plans, more still, units of study, samples of student work. Here's the student work in September, here's the student work in June. Videotapes of student focus groups talking about how they were engaged as learners. It becomes our body of work where we can review one another's work as peers as a basis for a better, more professional system of accountability. The choice is not accountability versus no accountability. There's got to be accountability. So the question is, do we accept the accountability that's being imposed on us? You're a good teacher or a bad teacher on the basis of one test once a year? It's lunacy. It's crazy. It's going to drive the best of us out of the profession. Or are we going to come up with a better system of accountability, beginning with transparency? I'm not going to do this now. What I want to do, we have 8 minutes, right, April? that right? Or are you going to get impatient in 5? Okay, I heard that. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to let you out early, but I want to give you a sneak preview of coming attractions. Here's the deal. I told you about this book, Creating Innovators, The Making of Young People Will Change the World. My friend Bob Compton and I did a video together, a documentary about Finland's education system, which I think you'd enjoy seeing, because there's a lot about classrooms and teaching in it. And when we went to Singapore, we thought we'd make a video there, and said there was not a story worth telling there. But he said, you know, you can't just write a book about innovation, Tony, it has to be innovative. So he persuaded me to put QR codes throughout the book, these little codes you scan with a smartphone, more than 60 of them. And he made videos to accompany the book, so that when you scan the QR codes with your smartphone, it takes you to a video that in some way illuminates some part of the book. So what I'm going to show you this morning is the video trailer for the book that is is a compilation of some of the videos that you will find throughout the book.
How important is innovation? How important is oxygen to life?
If America doesn't produce high imagination people, we are going to be a very poor country.
Raising someone with an intention that they'll be an innovator is actually different than raising a child that you want to behave all the time and be quite compliant.
Some of the people that are the most rambunctious seem to sometimes have the best ideas.
I want to feel like what I'm doing every day matters.
Of course, my guidance counselor told me to go straight to college. My dream manager might not have told me to do that.
I came to Tulane because I really wanted to go to a university that was committed to public service.
The philosophy of high-tech high is founded largely on the idea of kids making, doing, building, shaping, and inventing stuff.
The MIT Media Lab spent far less time in formal classrooms learning theory and far more time on projects building things.
Knowledge, in a sense, is a commodity. You can get this on Google. It's about asking the right questions. It's about having the right insights and perceptions.
Let them fail, because they're going to learn more from that than we could ever teach them directly.
Our success is measured more or less by the rate of innovation.
I have to end with a quote from literature, being a recovering high school. Remember the opening to Tale of Two Cities? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Probably the only thing you remember from high school English. Understandable reasons. These are very challenging times in education. I don't need to tell you that. You're living it. You know better than I. You're being asked to do more with less. You're under the gun with the public showing more impatience and less respect for our profession than probably at any time in history. Yet it is also, surprisingly in my experience, the best of times, because I have the opportunity to travel around the country and meet with extraordinary educators like you, who are really committed to this idea of not just incremental improvement, but reinvention, who are courageous, who are collaborative, and who are deeply committed to making a real difference for the future of their children and the future of our country. So I simply want to end by thanking you. Thank you very much for the incredibly important work you do every single day. Thank you.
Thank you all. I hope we leave energized and inspired, and the best is yet to come. All of the innovation that you commit to every day and imagine every day, it's only the beginning. So we wanted to get you on your way. Tony will be out at the book signing table, but if you'd like to leave your book, don't forget, we'll make sure you get it back. Have a great day.